Hey, this is the first video for our English composition class. I wanted to post this for the very first thing you had to read, the short essay called Not Vanity. And I will plan on making videos like these for the other reading requirements this semester for those winter Sundays, mother tongue, what is happiness, and everyday use. And these readings have been selected and curated, put together for you to read as a way of helping you with the different writing assignments this semester. So let's start first with the short piece, Not Vanity. As you probably noticed by now, I'm the one who wrote the piece. It was published back in 2022, and it is a personal narrative. And one of the reasons I assigned this piece is, I do think it's a good piece, but it's also a way of providing you evidence that the instructor of the class is someone who can do and has done what he's asking you to do. And it's come about through a lot of hard work, and whether you get there on this first paper or by the end of the semester, that's not the goal. The goal is that you're moving forward a little bit more with your understanding of the English language, how to read it, how to write it, and ultimately how to think. So with Not Vanity, what I want to point out first is the title. Your titles in every piece you write this semester, they need to have a name like that. Don't title your papers paper number 1, composition essay number 2, argumentative paper. Give it a name. Give it a name of a title. And that is the first way of drawing readers into your work. And the title for this piece, when you see the word vanity, more than likely you probably think of the idea of pride. And there is that connotation with the word, but I'm actually borrowing from an older connotation of the English translation of a Hebrew word for vapor. Some of you are probably familiar with the line, vanity of vanities. Saith the preacher, all is vanities. All is vanity, right? Everything is vapor, nothing is permanent. And so from the very title, it's good to be thinking about what is the writer trying to say here? And with our titles, we have obligated ourselves to explore that idea and to reveal it to our readers. And sometimes with titles, it's best that you don't worry about them until you've written the piece. In fact, the title for this essay I didn't get until I had written the piece. I had the memory, the plot points of going out and working with my dad, but I didn't know what I was going to find in writing that piece. Because you can write a story as far as a plot, but stories are not only plot. There's something beneath it, often called subtext, that which is unsaid, but can be found in all the pieces that are put together. And what this essay is exploring, and what I discovered as I sat down to write this narrative, these plot pieces, is I discovered the value, or already knew the value, but discovered that in that scene with my dad, there was something there as a testimony to his character. There was something there as a testimony to hard work, to manual labor. And it begins with those opening images. Right? We're there in front of the mulch. There's some figurative language to say that the mulch is like a creature. The narrator, if given the opportunity, would leave, doesn't want to do the job. And so there in this personal narrative is the question that the story must answer. Another word for the question is, what's the conflict? And then thinking ahead of, for your second paper, third paper, fourth paper, another word for that question or that main conflict is the word thesis. What is the thesis statement? What is the idea you're trying to explore? What is the argument you're trying to make? And so the question for this story is, will these two guys finish the job with this mulch? And we see that there's some conflict. The narrator, the younger version of me, the teenager version of me, didn't want to do it. And the grown dad, right, in that scene, we see that he's fine to do it. He just turns and unlocks the trailer and tells the son, let's get the shovels and let's get to work. And once that happens, we move into the second act. Now you'll hear me throughout the semester talk about acts, 1, 2, and 3. All stories have 3 acts. Even the essays you write can follow a 3-act structure. You've heard it before. Introduction, body, conclusion. I like to think of it as beginning, middle, and end, right? Or Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So any of those terms will work. Act 1 is where you set everything up, right? Here are the main characters, or here's the thesis, here's the thing that's going to be explored. And once we do all that, then we have to move out of that into the body of the paper, or into the middle portion of your paper and of your story. Now with stories, when you move from one act to the next, it's usually best to do it on a piece of action, but you don't have to. This is where some of your writing teachers have already told you about transitional words or transitional statements, right? You'll see those in this text, little clauses, little phrases that are used to move us from paragraph to paragraph. And we move out of the first act by the dad opening the trailer, telling the son to go get the shovels, and they get to work. And now the adventure begins. The second act begins. And we see that as they're working, complications start to accrue, right? They're already hot. We know that because the narrator's given us several details. But then he says about the steam coming out of the mulch. Then he talks about how that steam starts to make them sweat even more. And then he talks about the gnats that are coming while they're working. And as they continue to work, their clothes and all the sweat just gets heavier and heavier, just making it more difficult. So we get to about the midpoint of the story, halfway through the second act. And they've got gnats, they're covered in sweat, but they're moving forward with the job. And then something happens. The narrator tells us that he is struggling physically to work. His hands are aching, he stops to stretch his back, right? But then he notices that his dad is working almost without stop. He's like a beast of burden, the essay says, but a beast of burden that behind his eyes there's a rational mind, right? His dad's not an animal. His dad is a human being, someone who's thinking. And there's a separation that begins. There's already a separation between the son and the dad because of their age and because of their opinions about work. And then once the son decides to go with the father into the work, then the son starts to notice, I can't work like my father. And now, near the end of that second half, the piece gets in to the story itself, into what's called the reflection. What are we thinking about? What is being discovered in the story? And there the narrator starts to notice his father's body, the different muscles in his dad's body. And then he starts to think about characters from literature, whether from, in this case it's Greek mythology, or from the Bible, such as King David. He starts to think about those characters in connection with his dad and his dad's body. And one of the things that stands out in all those texts is all those characters grew old, they lost their strength, they died. And by implication, as the narrator knows, the same will happen to my dad, which means the same will happen to me. We're not here very long, the idea that life is vapor. So if it's true that we're not here very long, and that the work we have to do will have to be done again, what's the point? We go into the third act, and the writer says, we finished the job right after twilight or after the sun had set, we finished the job, and we get in the car to leave. So there, the writer has answered the question posed at the very beginning. Will they finish the job? Yes. And then he notices again his father's body as his dad puts his hands on the steering wheel, takes his hat off, sets it back down, and then says, this was too much like work. And off of that word, work, at the end of the paragraph, the writer uses the same words to start the next paragraph. This is called Anadiplosis. It's a Greek term that means a redoubling. We repeat something in order to help us with the steps. When we repeat something, it should be on purpose. We're doing it for emphasis. This is important. Let's go back to the ancient writer's statement. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. He actually says the word 3 times there, but he's trying to drive home the point. It is inescapable that our existence is like a vapor. If that's true, how ought we to behave? And that at the end of Not Vanity, the writer points out, my dad loves to work. And now we can go back to the piece that opens the essay, those few lines from the poem by Robert Frost, and that's called an epigraph. That's a Greek word that means to write over. We write this first or on top of a thing before we get into the thing. Don't underestimate the importance of those. They help set the tone, and establish maybe your primary theme or your big idea for your text. Also, if you decide to open your piece up with a quote, make sure you know where the quote has come from, and make sure you've probably read that quote in its original habitat. Don't just Google up or search up quotes, because oftentimes we can misinterpret them when we're just reading them as they stand alone. But as we conclude now, right, the story has started with, will they finish the mulch? Things have gotten more difficult. Then the narrator starts to notice the difference between he and his father. But in that difference, he starts to notice something admirable about his dad. And then to go into the third act. Yes, we finished the job, but here's this idea that I'm exploring, this idea that I'm contemplating. My dad worked because he loved to work. Yes, we as humans are flawed, and we can work because we're prideful. We can work because we can't stand stillness. And there's an idea of that mentioned in that last paragraph. I spent a lot of time working on those last few lines of the essay. I want to draw your attention to, when you go to write this personal narrative, make sure that it's not just you you're writing about. In fact, this piece, Not Vanity, while I'm in it, it's really paying attention to someone else. And it's amazing what we can learn when we look outside ourselves, when we look at something else, when we read something else. Pay attention to some other person and what we can gain from that. But when we write about ourselves or about other people, we need to be very careful that we don't just say everything's great all the time. It's important that we don't say everything's terrible all the time. We need to try to find a balance, right? Unless we're writing about someone who's a complete evil person, and even then we probably have some respect we ought to pay to them. But let's not just say, if you write a paper about your grandmom, that everything's perfect about it. Right? If your grandmom is just as human as you are, she's going to have her flaws. But also don't write a paper where it's just, I'm going to hammer home the flaws. That's all the bad things, right? So that second to last paragraph is me really trying to work on, well, what is maybe a critique I could offer, while at the same time still paying respect to this man and people like him who knows how to work hard and loves it. And then that last paragraph, we wrap everything up, right? We offer the big idea. How do we have something that is not vapor? It goes to our memory. Because of the example of the dad in that text, the narrator says, the memories of my father will be images of him at work. And people like him that I know, I will have images of them at work. And those images will be like altars in my mind. For his work outlasts the ages. His work is the work of the ages, capital A, and the ages outlast the grave. So it's a personal narrative that seems at first we're just spreading mulch. And there's a lot of attention paid to the human body. And then we get into the idea of death in the grave. And death in the grave, while it affects almost all of our faculties, it definitely touches the body. And yet, we can gain a type of permanence, immortality, if you want to think of it like that, if someone pays attention and carries us in their memory, and we have an effect on their life. And so then it begs the question too, what kind of person are you? How are you being remembered? And of course, the people that are mentioned in this essay, like Achilles and Odysseus and David, they are remembered in a way. It's one reason why it's very important to read old stories and beware of old stories and that which has gone before us. So there's a brief discussion. It might not seem very brief to you. I know it's about 15 minutes plus here, but read this video as you have read Not Vanity. If you have any questions, please email me, reach out to me. And this piece is going to serve as a good model as the type of writing we're looking for this semester, and especially on this first paper.